Welcome everybody to another episode of our podcast for firefighter.support. Really appreciate Brandon being here with us today, and Neal, one of the elite fire captains at Logan Fire. Brandon, why don't you start off, just kind of introduce yourself to us and kind of the department and kind of a little bit of your background and some of the things you specialize in.
Okay. So I'm a local guy. I grew up here in Cache Valley, out in Young Ward. I don't know if you guys know where that is, just kind of out there by Minden, out in the field. So I grew up there, went to Mountain Crest High School, served a church mission, came home, decided, I guess I'd try that college thing, went through it. Got a bachelor's in sociology. I immediately got a job at Youth Corrections. Worked there for about 4 or 5 years before I decided I probably should go back to school, get a little more education. Original plan was to go into school counseling, but some other things came up that I thought would be a better switch to go into mental health. I graduated in 2008, and I got a job at the health department doing substance addiction counseling, so working with mostly offenders of the law. That's kind of been the main focus. It's transitioned better since then, but most of our clients were drug court or probation and general public as well, but it was a good experience for really getting a baptism by fire of addiction. I also did some private practice at the time, working with pornography addiction, and so in total probably about 12 years, 13 years working in that kind of environment. 3 years ago, I got a job working for the church and doing some vocational counseling. And a year ago, I opened up my private practice again to do more general therapy kinds of things. I've been working with the Victims Advocate Office to take any bystanders or victims of trauma, first responders of any kind. And that's been a really good experience for me. I've really enjoyed it. Feeling like you're giving back to the people that give back to you. So I've really enjoyed therapy. I do best on one-on-one. I can do the group things and I can really enjoy that, but I work really good with one-on-one and work with people's issues where they're at. So I do the private practice several nights a week. I usually do about 9 to 10 hours a week, and I go on calls if things come up. So
Sure.
Yeah, and it's been good to learn.
Yeah, that's awesome. What is it about doing therapy and working with people that you love and that has kept you in it, that you didn't do it for a couple of years and like, nah, I'm out of here?
Yeah. So, you hear everything. Any problems that people are going through, you hear it. And so you get to be with people in their personal space. Their ideas they don't even share with their parent, things that they don't share with their spouses. And so you kind of have a bond with a client that you're really in their most intimate and most vulnerable self. So to be trusted with that kind of relationship is high importance to me. But the thing that's kind of the paycheck is when you see the kind of that light go off, like, oh, that's a thing, or they get something about their life that they hadn't thought about, or, really the topping is when they make the changes and things in their lives. But in addiction, that's a hard field to see that. So it takes time to see. You kind of have to glory in the planting of the seeds and the process and know that it's going to take some time. But yeah, just when you connect with someone and you see the immediate difference in their life, and sometimes you get families that know you or get to hear about what's going on. So seeing that relationship and seeing the person develop and grow or get over something that they've been struggling with, that's the paycheck.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I think, sometimes in our line of work as firefighters too, I think sometimes you can go down a track and get kind of jaded because you're dealing with, the worst of society sometimes. And I'd imagine it's probably similar for you, but then it's so cool when you get on the flip side of that, the real powerful part of human nature and being able to change, and somebody who's in the depths of whatever addiction or trouble or mental health issue, to be able to watch that person kind of take control of their life back, I think is pretty awesome. And for us too, in those moments when you're helping somebody, you get that, feel like you're really making that difference. It's pretty, like you said, the paycheck, it's kind of what we're all keep going back for.
Yeah.
But that's pretty cool. So, our topic today, and with your kind of specialty and experience with addiction, I know Neal has some experience on kind of the ups and downs of that. And so, Neal, tell us a little bit about your story and, of course, as much detail as you're comfortable sharing, but specifically, I think, how it related to the fire field, and, it wasn't probably necessarily just for the, the hell of it, but more of, maybe related to some of the things you're seeing or trying to deal with or cope with. But
yeah, excuse me. I think, I grew up in a fairly religious home, and we never really did a whole lot till I got to high school and kind of fiddled around with drinking and smoking and all that kind of stuff, and, kind of cleaned up my act. And I also served a mission for the church, and then came home, met my wife, got married, and I started in the fire service, and, I hadn't really done any substance abuse or anything like that for years and years. And I remember we went to fire school one year, and, one of my buddies was like, hey, let's have a beer. And I was like, yeah, why not? And so I started drinking that. And that night we got pretty tipped over. It was a rough night, but it was more just for fun, just for the hell of it, like you say. We just kind of started doing that. And it seemed like, at that point, my wife was working full time, and so was I. And I think when, I had all these 4 days off in a row, I'd started going to the liquor store and getting a bottle of alcohol or whatever hard liquor, and I'd bring it home and I'd fiddle around with chainsaws out in the garage or do whatever little projects around the house, and it was mostly just for fun. And then I think there's a few calls that I went on that were pretty rough for me, and I didn't really understand having a good support system at the time. And so I think it turned it from something that was fun into, now this is helping me to feel better in the short run. And it kind of just spiraled from there. And, I started going out on a lot of fires every summer. And I think, something out there, everybody smokes or chews, and I was no different. I chewed quite a bit, and I only would smoke if we were out there and there was cigarettes around. But it gets to the point where, the nicotine was pretty interesting, because it's a very different feel as far as like feeling that need to have it. And it wasn't necessarily needing to have a pouch or some, a whole bunch of chewing inside of my mouth. It was more of, if I didn't have it accessible, like in my car, like it almost gives you a state of panic, which was super weird, trying to get away from that. And for a long time, I'd always just have a can of chew in my car, just in the little armrest. And it was just something I didn't really think about it. I'd drive into town, and if I was getting low, I'd just stop and grab another can. And eventually, I got to the point where I was like, I really need to quit doing this. It's a terrible habit. It's not good. I know any type of stimulant is going to be not good for if I'm, in crisis or close to it or something like that. If I had bad thoughts or whatever else. And I never really went to the point of like considering hurting myself. And I feel like when I would really start struggling with something, I'd reach out here and there with people. And I had my brother there at the station. He was pretty easy to talk to. I could always kind of lean back on him. But when we were on separate shifts, like I said, I'd be trying to cope with something, and I'd just be home drinking. And it would help in the short term. And it seemed like things just piled on. I wasn't really getting relief. It wasn't getting any better. And it seemed like I was starting to drink for longer periods of time in the day. And Hannah would go to work, and I'd just freaking go out in the garage, and 8 or 9 in the morning, I'd start getting tipped over in an empty stomach. And it worked quick. It started out quick, and I could keep a pretty good buzz, or be pretty tipsy all day long, just out there fiddling around. Anyway, I got a lot of stuff done. I built tons of shelves. It was awesome.
Sure.
But things kind of came to a head eventually. And it was when Will was probably my oldest boy. He was probably about close to a year old. And Hannah, she was wanting to go to England and take Will and meet a bunch of her mom's family. And I couldn't get work off. And I don't remember if I couldn't get trades or couldn't get shift off, or it was too expensive or whatever it was. But she ended up going, taking Will. And so I was just bacheloring it for, 2 weeks. And in that time period, my fridge was pretty full of fancy liquors. I remember we bought some absinthe, and it was a bad decision anyway. But I remember we went, and that was about the time that we shot the movie for the lawnmower fuel, and we did that, and that was pretty dang fun. I was sober for that, just so everybody's aware. But I remember I had the old Honda, and we tried to roll the Honda driving in and out of cones. It was me and Brent, and we were driving down to Beezer to grab a plate or something. And anyway, Brent come over one night, and as a trade, he was putting a deadbolt in our front door. And I remember, and I've been pretty pretty dang good close friends with Brent since we started. We both started at the same time at the fire department there in North Logan as volunteers. And it was the beginning of our relationship. We kind of battled to see who could get to the station, jump on the engine first. To my everlasting dismay, Brent had fire one and I didn't one night, and I got on the engine. He kicked me off to go to a fire. I was sad.
And now Neal's my captain, and I've been paying for it ever since.
No, but I remember that night when we were working on the deadbolt, we were sitting around, and it caught me way off guard. Brent, he's sitting there working, and we're just kind of BSing, and out of the blue, he just says, "Why are you, like, I know you don't go to church anymore, you're not religious anymore." He's like, "What's changed, or how come you're," basically he asked me why I'm a piece of crap. And I was like, are we really doing this? Really having this talk right now? And I was surprised. And he was like, yeah. It's like, I want to know what's making you act different. What has changed with you that's made you different? And that was really the first time in I don't know how many, a couple of years, that I really like sat back and reflected on me, like, why am I doing the things I'm doing? And looking back on it, my family has alcoholism, like bad alcoholism. I've got a couple aunts that have pretty severe alcoholism in my family. And so I never really thought I was an alcoholic, but looking back, like, I had to have a drink every day of my 4 off. And, that's kind of textbook alcoholic. And, I felt like I was a pretty high functioning alcoholic. I could build shelves. I could tear a chainsaw down and put it back together, whatever. And anyway, that was really the beginning of when I started to look at myself and say, why am I doing this? What is keeping me doing this? I'm not doing it just because it's fun. Because in my mind, I was still thinking, yeah, I'm still doing this just because it's fun. But it was Brent kind of having the guts to stand up to a friend and say, hey, something's changed with you. Let's talk about it. I want to see some healing. I want to see something change. I want what's best for you. And at the time, it's easy to feel like you're being attacked. And, with time comes a little bit more clarity, and being able to look back at that and say, that was probably one of the biggest pivotal moments in my life for me personally, to recover and to begin that recovery process. And it wasn't overnight, and I can't remember if I was still chewing at that time or not, but I quit chewing, and that was super hard. I remember at every shift I'd be driving, I was working at Station 71 up on campus at the time, and I would just stop at the Foothill Mart there and at the Aggie Station on 8th East and grab a can every week. And I remember the first time I didn't, and it was almost like I felt sick, like physically ill, driving past it and not stopping. And it progressively became easier for me to drive past that service station, and not stop and get chew. And the alcohol, like that, it had quite a harder grip on me. And it took me years after that experience to actually get to where I could kick the habit. And at the time, I was hiding it from my wife, and I think she knew deep down, but we never talked about it. We didn't communicate really good, but I remember it was probably 3 months or 6 months after, Brent, you came over and read me the riot act. It was a while after that I came clean, and I told Hannah everything. And I realized at the time that it could have meant a change in our relationship as far as like our marriage. And I felt like, coming clean and being able to be proactive on that, it took every bit of courage that I had, I guess, to be able to do that. But I was really surprised. Hannah was super understanding. I could feel the disappointment. And at that point she said, well, let's get you better. And, from there, things became easier and easier. And it seemed like it was about a year after that, there was one last hurrah that I really got super drunk one night. And it was at EMS conference. And I remember I was going down with two dudes that I knew didn't drink, and I was like, hey, don't let me drink tonight. Just keep an eye on me. And it was all I could do. There's one other guy he poured some fancy vodka in with a white monster and was like, this tastes like hairspray, try it. So I was like, no. And he's like, try it. No. And finally I was sick of him saying, try it, and shoving it in my face. And I tried it, and I'm like, you're right, that tastes like Aquanet. That's disgusting. And then I was like, well, I've already had some now. So I just poured a bunch of vodka in a glass and started sipping on it, or just chugging it. Anyway, we ended up with moonshine. I got super drunk that night, and I was drunk until about 5 o'clock the next afternoon. And after that, I was like, this is stupid. I felt like garbage the whole day. The whole day was pretty much wasted. And, I felt like crap. And after that, there's one other time that I cracked open a couple beers, and it was the day my daughter was born. And that was kind of just this little celebration, I guess. I cracked open a couple beers after I got the boys into bed, and that was the last time I drank. It's been almost 9 years. And I think one of the hardest things for me, I went to paramedic school with 3 of my closest friends, and when we went out to dinner, we had to go down to Provo for the testing process, and it was I think it was overnight. Went out to dinner, they all had a beer, and they had Sam Adams, which is one of my favorites, and one of them pushed it over towards me. He was like, "You want some?" I was like, "Nah, I just want to smell it." And I brought it over and sniffed it, and I was like, "Yep, it smells delicious." Pushed it back, and he's like, "You can have it." And I'm like, "No, man, I've been sober for 3 years." And at that point, that phrase is what changed things for everybody. I felt like, to where nobody wanted to tempt me anymore. Nobody wanted to try to get me to drink anymore. When I said I've been sober for this long, that was when people stopped, and they're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." They're like, I'm not trying to enable or anything else. And honestly, there's a lot of times that go by that I think, yeah, it'd be nice to kick back with a beer at the end of the night with dinner, or just throw back a couple shots or whatever and just get a nice buzz going. But man, it's pretty awesome to be able to say I've been sober for 8.5 years. And I think a lot of times when I talk, I'm pretty open about it now. It was always hard for me to talk about it at the time, because I felt like I was being sneaky or I was hiding something. But I feel like now I've had enough healing time, enough time to process and think about that, to be able to say, if this helps somebody else to at least evaluate their personal life and look and say, why am I drinking so much? Or why do I have to have a pouch of nicotine? Or why do I have to have whatever stimulant they have? Or heaven forbid somebody has an opiate addiction or something like that. I hope that there's some type of healing or some type of clarity that somebody can get and say, you have to go through hell to be able to heal sometimes. And I feel like, I went through hell, and luckily I had good friends, and I had somebody that was close enough to me and felt like they could actually say something. And, Brent, I don't know if you realized how big of an impact that had on me at the time. And I don't know if it crossed your mind to think that could have compromised our relationship or not. But looking back, I don't know that I would be brave enough to say something to a friend like that. But it changed my life. It really did.
Well, I think what people don't know about that story is I totally jacked up the deadbolt, and so I had to get the attention off of me. So I had to put it back on you. No, I think, I really appreciate you sharing all that, because I think what, a lot of people probably feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brandon, is that they're the only ones. They must be the only ones that are suffering from an addiction like this, or having to turn to these certain coping mechanisms or whatever. But I think when people hear the story, that's probably a lot more common than we think. I don't know. And so maybe help us dissect a little bit kind of what Neal shared with us, and kind of what, how you see it from your perspective.
Yeah. So first of all, congratulations on your success and what you've worked for.
Thank you.
Back in the day, when I used to work in the drug court program, there used to be a Judge Wilmore, and he would say there was nothing more important than someone getting clean. There was nothing more important that can happen today than someone controlling their addiction. And so, we want to celebrate that as an example of what we can accomplish. And there's some elements to this story that I want to highlight. One, you had peers that you could communicate with, they could see you. Oftentimes with addiction, we find ourselves isolating from other people. Why? Because we understand that what we're doing isn't socially acceptable. It's appearing as a weak behavior. We know there's a stigma with addiction, and so we do all we can to hide it. And so with that hiding, it increases that shame factor, and the fear of getting help means being found out, which, if you understand addiction, the core of almost all people's addiction is this fear of being seen completely. All your vulnerabilities, all of your weaknesses, the thing that you're trying to avoid must become open at some point and known. And sometimes facing that closet, that skeleton in the closet of the thing that's most disturbing to us, is a really difficult task. When you get into the substances or whatever the addiction is, it doesn't have to be substances. All of us have our short-term coping mechanisms. They can be pornography, or they can be drugs or alcohol, or even just buying things. Or we all have stuff that we do. Everyone has habit behavior we try to use to cope. Some of them are good. Talking to our families, even going out and working out, different things. Some of them have less of a consequence. The ones that we really start to see that have real negative consequences are the ones that start changing your motivations. When you start hiding things and looking for ways to escape so you can use them to engage in those behaviors, we start to see them pull our emotions apart. When you think about what happens with addiction, we go from being a very thoughtful, future tense thinking person, retirement and my kids and people and all these different aspects. But the further along you get into addiction, it's like you get into a hole. The hole is a temporal satisfaction kind of mindset, where before and other times you're very thoughtful and very future oriented across time and space. But when you get into that addiction mindset, the only thing that matters is right now, the next 10 minutes. What do I need to survive the next 10 minutes? And so the common thing here is the presence of pain. Pain is the entire category of anything that's uncomfortable. Pain could be a thorn in your foot, or it can be judgment of our peers. It could be a self-esteem thing. Point of direction, you can find something that's a source of pain that we can be experiencing. When that pain becomes significant enough where we combine a addictive behavior, and the addictive behavior, the ones that are the most troublesome are the ones that are most addictive. The ones that are most addictive are the fastest acting substances, behaviors. Pornography is very addictive. Cocaine, meth, some of these other substances, they're very addictive because they're so quick acting. And what happens is that we become so easily changed, and it's so accessible and it's so repeatable, it becomes a trusted friend to try and get us out of those mind states. So the work that we do in therapy is to help get out of that appetite-driven, moment-to-moment thinking brain. It takes friends. It takes therapists sometimes. Sometimes it takes having accountability partners. And the utmost is to be honest with yourself and other people in your life that you're going through this. And yes, we all go through some version of this. All of us have habits, maybe not all led into some kind of behavior that's addiction, but we all have things that we do. We all have fears of being seen in our true self and our true worries, our fears, and there are places we can go to get those things addressed. The great thing about therapy is we're paid to be quiet. We are paid to hear things and understand and connect and hear the true ideas of your soul, and it stays in that room. And that's probably similar to what you experience in the peer support groups that you have. It's someone that can hear those things that's going on in your life. And again, it's across the board. There's every direction, every person has struggles and trials, and there's addictive potential there. And you can be a healthy person and come from a good home, good lifestyle, good background. But if you have a series of experiences that are difficult, unmanageable, and you accompany that with some kind of addictive behavior, you've now made a perfect trap for addiction to occur. And as we sit here today thinking we're maybe okay, all of us without regular communication with others, addressing what our emotions are, our experiences, our traumas, if we don't address those things, we easily could become into those traps of addiction just like anybody else. Even after being in recovery, we have to be vigilant and being aware and connecting with each other. Again, which is why peer support and something like that is so effective. If you're standing in front of people and you see them enough, you can tell when somebody's off, when something isn't the way it should be, or you just feel it. And so, kudos for those who can say something and approach people, even their hard times, and having the courage to discuss those kinds of things is so huge. So yeah, it's common, it's everywhere, and the great thing is there's more resources today than there ever has been. There's more therapies that can be helpful. There are emerging techniques like EMDR, ART that can help desensitize some of those early tendencies and cravings and urges. Sometimes we need to go back and figure out what some of the seed emotional trials are, traumas, and kind of clear those. And you also need a program of accountability and a peer group that you can address your successes and when you're not doing so well,
Sure.
be accountable to. So, there's a lot there. And so getting in front of people, talking about what's going on, being able to feel what the trials are, the struggles, that's where we can come in. That's where the peer support can come in. But it's a true fight. It's amazing when you see someone be successful managing their addiction. It's a reason to celebrate. And for those who can be open about it, I think you sent me an example of your podcast of the other gentleman that shared his addiction publicly. And I have huge respect for those who can share what their addictions are, because it sends a message to everyone else. It's not just me. It's not just me that suffers through this issue. It's a common thing.
Yeah. Do you find that when people are more open about it like that, it kind of takes the power away from, I feel like sometimes even if it's not addiction, but even if it's just some of our traumatic memories, but the more we keep that to ourselves, it just seems like it gets exaggerated. But the moment you put it to words, it just seems to, I don't know, bring it down a few notches anyway.
Well, if you just think of goal setting, one of the first mistakes people make in setting a goal is they keep it to themselves. They keep their ideas, their wants, and their desires to themselves. Why is that less effective? Because you can lie to yourself. You can easily quit your own goals. You can easily go against your plans, your values, whatever. But when you talk to someone and you tell them about, this is what I need, this is what's going on, it becomes open, real. Now you have accountability people that can help you. The most effective programs for recovery are those that happen in teams, groups, where they have partners. Instead of being one brain going through ups and downs of emotional trial and triggers, you have multiple brains working through those issues. When people that you're in recovery, they can help you instead of hinder you. They can be there to help you be clear about your thinking when you may not be, when you're triggered.
Yeah. And I think that's right back to kind of Neal's story about the version that tasted like hairspray versus when he started letting them know, hey, I'm on a road of recovery. I think as soon as people recognize that or realize that, like, they want to help, especially I feel like most first responders, that's our world, right? We want to be on the helping side, not on the problem making side. And so the moment you kind of let them into that, I feel like, there's a pretty good support group from the guys. And one thing I wanted to touch on from Neal's story that I think is applicable to, or perhaps applicable to guys on the department right now, is recognizing the problem, right? Like Neal, with your story, and looking back now, hindsight's 2020, but at what point do you feel like it was a problem, and what point, how much further down the road did it become recognizable to you as a problem?
I think it's easy to lie to yourself about whether or not it's a problem. I remember going to the liquor store and getting like 4 bottles of whiskey and a couple of bottles of rum and thinking, this is awesome. I'm going to have enough for, a couple of weeks stashed in my garage or wherever. And I remember thinking, as I was sitting there checking out, I thought, is this excessive? And I thought, no, I should probably go get some more. And I think that was partially me, lying to myself. But I think in deep down, I knew that it was not great. And growing up in a religious family, there's always that aspect of you're doing something shady or sneaky or something you shouldn't be doing. So there's always that little bit of guilt in there. But, at the same time, I was thinking, I'm a grown up. I can make my own decisions, and I can have a drink if I want to. It's, it's my choice. And I think that when, there was another person that we worked with at the time. They don't work at Logan anymore, but I remember running into them, and they had a huge black eye, huge shiner. I was like, hey, what happened? And they're like, well, I might have been just changing out a light bulb and slipped and fell. And I kind of gave them the eye and was like, is that all that happened? You just slipped and fell? And they kind of got that grin on their face. And I was like, okay. And I remember thinking, I don't want to get that tipped over. I don't want to end up like that and have to have something I have to lie about or try to explain my way out of. But really, I think when I quit lying to myself was, because the other thing, I had that crutch, and I don't know if you remember or not. You're like, well, why are you drinking? I was like, well, I'm drinking. I've got this problem with God. He's allowing horrible things to happen to kids, and I don't like it. And, you're like, well, why do you think that is? And you kind of just threw it back on me, and I was like, well, I know what the missionary answer is. And you're like, well, what is it? You kept pushing. And finally I went and looked up, and I remember right where it's at, but I read a piece of scripture and I thought, okay, well, that makes perfect sense why God allows bad things to happen to the innocent. And then I didn't have a crutch to lean on. I didn't have an excuse anymore. And I think once I had that excuse for so long, and I chose not to address it. I just had it there as an excuse. Once I actually had to address it and realize that it was a dumb excuse, that's really when I thought to myself, I have a problem. And then I remember shortly after that, I looked at the past 3 months at how much money I had wasted on substance, and it was phenomenal. I could have bought a new PlayStation with that money. I probably could have bought a truck full of Mountain Dew or something. But really, that was about the time I started thinking, hey, this is unnecessary. This is out of hand. I've got a problem.
Yeah. And, for you, Brandon, when people come and to see you and are finally ready to start turning that corner or turn around, usually, how far deep are they into it? And what difference would it make if they would have come to you a year earlier or months earlier? Or, how often do you see that and think, man, if you would have saw me a year ago, this process would be this long. But now you're this far deep into it, this is going to be a little bit of a road.
Yeah, obviously the earlier the better, but probably the number one need in terms of recovery is personal buy-in. The person has to be ready. There's probably a time you maybe were thinking I should probably get some help, but if you weren't ready, it doesn't really work.
Yeah, I wasn't ready when Brent came over and talked to me. That was there's no way I'm going to be trying to recover.
Yeah, most addiction, when it's somebody else pushing for the change, you just get lots of resistance. Personal, because one, we all have this, 3-year-old in us says, I'll do it myself. We don't want anybody to help us. We can do it by ourselves. And then there's the other part that says, you can take something away, I'm going to hold on to it harder, right? But with addiction, life is a very effective teacher. It tells us where we're making mistakes. When we get into this addiction cycle, the things that we're doing are causing pain. They're causing disappointment in ourselves, failures in our roles that we live in. And so, yes, the longer we go, the worse it's going to become. I hope anybody who's listening or watching this can think, well, what is the symptoms I have? Well, if you're hiding your behavior, you're hiding your addictions, if it's causing you to be dysfunctional in your roles as a family member or a colleague or work, if you're hiding it and having to lie about it, these are some common symptoms. If you are drinking in the morning or using early in the day, if you have developed tolerance to a significant level, these are all symptoms that it's becoming a problem. And I would encourage anybody who may think they have a problem, get in to see somebody. There's resources available, especially for the first responders, and there's different programs available to get in front of somebody to get some help and see it from a clear set of eyes. And those who are there to help you will help you identify what the real issues are, the real concerns. And while the addiction behavior is a problem, and there are issues that have to be overcome, like triggers and your body's natural tendency to want and crave for something that it's been adjusted to having, that's a unique, and it's a habit problem on steroids. It's a difficult challenge in itself. But if we can take care of the precursor stuff, the things that are the traumas, it could be past history kinds of stuff, it could be family issues, it could be day-to-day trauma kinds of problems, or just failure, it could be anything. If there are the seeds to these emotional states that cause us to be triggered, we want to address those. We want to get to the heart of those things, take the energy out of the addiction. You think about the addiction behavior, it's really a symptom of another problem. So yes, we do need to address the behavior. We do want that to stop because it's harmful. But you also want to get to the why. What's the issue that's preceding it? What's contributing to it? And let's take care of it so it's no longer an issue. And again, it can take some time. The more significant, the more time you've been in addiction and engaging this behavior, It may take a little more work, and it may take a bigger team than just one individual. It may take a team of individuals to be a part of your process of change. But there is success in all those levels. We want to get to it as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I love how you said, a lot of times, if not all the time, the addiction is the symptom. So often it gets all the attention, and so we don't really focus on the why too much. And, our whole job is treating symptoms. But how frustrated do we get with some frequent flyers that are always falling or always calling, and it's like, we're only going to put this Band-Aid on so many times. Like, you really need to figure this out. Like, this isn't what 911 is for or whatever, and yet for ourselves, we're just as happy to, keep repeating and trying to treat the symptom and not go to the core of the issue.
And for many people, it's not just one thing. It could be a series of things. It could be a lifetime of things. And so it really could use some assessment to see what's behind it.
Yeah. And, I think that's where it comes back to seeing somebody who's professionally trained to give that assessment, right?
Yeah.
How, again, and I think we've mentioned this before too, but it's like, how often do we go on scene and there's a helper that isn't very helpful, right? But they're assessing and trying to do all the things, but the second somebody's trained there, then we start to make progress, right? And even how many times do we go and there is a trained person, but they're out of their element? Some doctor on scene or a nurse, but this isn't the hospital, and so they're trying to be helpful, but sometimes it's like, you need to let us work in our environment right now to get the best outcome. And so I think, for anybody who's watching, there's no harm in seeing somebody, even if you don't think you have a problem, but you're just trying to assess that why, right? Like, and while the weed's small, and, it wouldn't hurt to get a new perspective, even if you go see somebody just one time, right? And so maybe we can just kind of wrap up today with kind of your guys' final kind of 2 cents to anybody who's watching this episode of kind of, if have been in this mode of on the fence of, do I have a problem? Do I not? Kind of what you would tell them and encourage them to do. And, same for you, Neal, is just kind of, if you could go back and tell yourself 9 years ago, something, kind of what would that advice be?
I think, taking that first step is always the scariest part about it, and having somebody help you take that first step is always an option, but getting out there, just trying to evaluate yourself. I encourage anybody that's listening to the podcast or watching it, ask yourself a couple of questions. Ask yourself, is there any substance that I use and I feel like I have to have it first thing in the morning or any part of the day after dinner, whatever it is? And, it could be as simple as caffeine or nicotine, and it could be as complex as, like you're saying, some of those other addictive things, cocaine, meth, whatever it is. And say, is this destructive? Is it bad for my health? And chances are the answer is yes. But the hardest part for anybody, I think, especially for me, was admitting that there is a problem and taking that time to evaluate yourself and ask that question, what am I going to do from here? What's the first step I have to make now? Or what's the next step I have to make to progress instead of continue to degress? And I had a good friend once tell me that in life, you're either progressing or degressing. You can't just go steady. You can try to go steady, but chances are you're either just slowly, gradually climbing up or going down. And I think it works in all aspects of life. But if as long as you're trying to improve and taking a step forward, there's people out there that are willing to help. There's people out there that are willing to listen. If you're afraid to go see a therapist, I've been to therapy a couple of times, and it's really helped me get a better perspective. And if nothing else, it's just that stigma is always there for me too, that I don't need any help. I'm that little kid that I'm going to do this by myself. I'm going to recover by myself. But it does help. And I think if somebody's asking you, you want me to make you an appointment with a therapist? You want me to call a therapist? It's probably because you need to go see a therapist and you need to talk to somebody. And I think, like I said, the hardest part is admitting that and taking that first step.
Very good. So with specifically addiction, we want to address the stressors. Everyone has stress. Life is stress. Relationships are demanding. Our jobs are demanding. We're involved with so many different things. We all encounter different forms of stress. And we're all at different points of our ability to manage that stress on different days. Today, I might be on top of my game, and I might need some help from you guys. Tomorrow, it might be you that might need some help. And if you can understand that each of us have these ups and down moments, that's why a team environment is so important. When you have a group of people that see you, not everybody's going to be on their game every day. Not everybody's going to be resilient to the same things every day. And so when those things come up that get to us, no matter where they come from, to have someone to talk to be involved with, to be heard, to process those things, it diffuses the emotions that really make the trap of addiction become more of an issue. If you're working in addiction or living in addiction, or maybe you think you might be in addictive behavior, we can still address it. The earlier the better. The sooner we can get to understand what the compulsive behavior is and understand what's behind it, we can do something about it. Addiction is not a requirement it doesn't need to be lethal. It can be addressed. And the things we have in place today are better than it's ever been. We have a culture that's looking for help. We have resources to be able to provide that help. We have training and different therapies that are more effective than they've ever been. We've come a long way since the 1930s and Otis and the Andy Griffith show, we've come a long way since those days. And there's some really effective treatments that we can engage in and help people. So I would encourage anyone. There's plenty of therapists in the area. It's anonymous. It doesn't get reported back to your work if you come to see us, and we'll get you some help.
Yeah. Yeah, and you said that earlier too about the resources. We've never had more than we have today, and I appreciate ending on that note because it's so true. And, I'd go as far as even to say with our peer team, it's never been as strong or as involved as it is right now. And so, for anybody who needs a little bit of help with that first step, like Neal said, we're happy to help make that first appointment for you or make that call or just be that first listening ear to help you evaluate if you need some extra help. The peer team certainly doesn't have all the answers, but I think we can help point in the right direction. And that same privacy and confidentiality goes across the board. But I think the best part about the fire department has always been the camaraderie and your brothers and sisters on the department. And so I think, I don't know what it's like necessarily for a regular person 9-to-5 job, but they're probably not as noticed as much by their peers, I'd say, as you are with the fire department. The guys and girls that you stay at the station with for 48 hours and respond on calls, they're going to be the first ones to notice that difference. And I think that's not a bad thing. That's a wonderful thing that we have this resource in our jobs with the people that we work with that care about us. And we hope that, people will utilize it. So thank both of you for doing this today. Thank you, Neal, for sharing and going through that, and for your expertise, Brandon. We hope somebody's going to set up some appointments with you to get some help. So
I've got some openings, so
let's do
call.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Thank you.